Imagine an alternate North America where the 13 colonies never became the United States. No Declaration of Independence carved into history. No triumphant Continental Army marching out of Yorktown. Instead, picture a world where George Washington's troops collapse under the sheer weight of British power. The revolution disintegrates, and by the early 1780s, the dream of independence dies on the battlefield. This is not a simple reversal of victory. A British triumph doesn't just change a war. It reshapes an entire continent, rewrites global politics, and alters the future of democracy itself. In this alternate world, the American colonies are dragged back into the orbit of a victorious British Empire. The rebellion is remembered not as the birth of a nation, but as a brief and dangerous uprising. London moves quickly to prevent such a crisis from ever happening again. Military governors replace local revolutionary assemblies. Loyalist elites are rewarded with land and power. And those who once declared independence, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, are arrested, exiled, or quietly disappear from the public eye. Washington himself becomes a symbol of failed rebellion, his legacy not heroic but cautionary. But Britain understands something deeper. Punishment alone won't stabilize a restless continent. The empire adopts a strategy of controlled reform. Some taxes are lifted. Colonial assemblies are restored, but tightly managed. London tries to build a British America that is loyal, prosperous, and firmly under imperial command. The colonies do not become the United States. They become the empire's great North American project. Without independence, the cultural identity of North America evolves very differently. English remains the dominant language, but the political vocabulary never includes liberty and equality for all. Instead of producing a constitution built on separation of powers and individual, British America develops a slower, more cautious political evolution, something like Canada, but far more controlled. The idea of American exceptionalism never exists, because the United States never comes to represent a radical experiment in self-governance. And that means that the global wave of revolutions that followed the real American victory never finds its spark. The French Revolution still arrives, but without the American example, it feels less like a model and more like a leap into the unknown. European monarchies stand stronger. Liberal movements have fewer arguments to justify their cause. Democracy spreads much more slowly because it lacks the first major proof that ordinary citizens can overthrow an empire and build a functioning republic. Back in North America, the indigenous nations witness a dramatically different future. In real history, the young United States relentlessly pushed westward, fueled by demographic pressure and the ideology of manifest destiny. But British imperial policy is more cautious. The Proclamation Line of 1763, which restricted westward settlement, remains in force. Entire regions of the continent stay under indigenous control for decades longer. A powerful alliance emerges in the Ohio Valley, supported by Britain as a buffer against colonial settlers. Shawnee, Cherokee, and Haudenosaunee nations retain more autonomy and military leverage. Yet this stability is fragile. By the early 1800s, British America faces new pressure, not from its own population, but from an unexpected rival, Spain. With the American Revolution suppressed, Spain sees an opportunity to strengthen its hold on the Gulf Coast, Florida, and the territories stretching into the Mississippi Valley. A three-way contest forms between Britain, Spain, and indigenous nations, each trying to shape the future of the continent. The map of North America becomes a slow-moving chess match, with no single power capable of dominating it. The most striking difference emerges with the absence of the U.S. Constitution. Without a federal republic bridging a vast territory, North America becomes a landscape of competing colonial administrations, imperial borders, and negotiated alliances. The continent never unifies into a massive continental power. There is no United States to eventually become the richest nation on earth, no engine of industrial growth, no global superpower. The consequences ripple across the world. When the Industrial Revolution spreads, Britain remains the dominant force, and its North American colonies become an extension of its economic network. Boston, New York, and Philadelphia grow into major imperial ports, but their wealth flows back to London. A global balance of power becomes even more tilted toward the British Empire. The 19th century formations of global politics changed dramatically. Without an independent United States, Britain faces fewer geopolitical constraints. The War of 1812 never happens. The Mexican-American War never happens. The Spanish Empire survives a little longer without an aggressive U.S. pushing westward. And without a rising American Navy, Britain's control of the seas remains virtually unchallenged. And then there is slavery, the issue that defined America's first century. In this alternate world, the future of slavery is not determined by a U.S. Civil War, because the United States never exists. Instead, the fate of slavery is decided in London. By the 1830s, the British Empire abolishes slavery across its territories. That means the American South still, a group of British-controlled provinces, is forced to end slavery decades earlier than in real history. There is resistance. There is anger. But there is no independent nation to fight for the institution. Abolition comes from above, not from a civil. This single change reshapes global labor systems, demographic patterns, and racial politics. Millions of enslaved people gain freedom earlier, and the violent scars of a massive civil war never form. But racial inequality does not disappear. Instead, it evolves under the structure of an empire that abolishes slavery while still maintaining rigid social hierarchies. By the late 1800s, the world begins confronting a new question. What happens when the British Empire becomes too large, too complex, and too expensive to manage? In actual history, the United States had already risen as a counterweight. In this alternate world, Britain faces its challenges alone. Nationalist movements erupt across India, Africa, and Asia. Anti-colonial thinkers have no American republic to lean on for ideological support, but they still push for independence. The empire strains under its own weight. North America becomes the jewel London is desperate to hold on to. Over time, reforms expand. A dominion of North America emerges something like Canada, but larger, richer, and more influential. It becomes semi-autonomous, but not fully independent. Its political identity is complex, not American, not British, but something in between. Without a United States, the world wars unfold differently. World War I still erupts, dragged by European rivalries. But the absence of an American army entering the war in 1917 means the stalemate in Europe lasts longer. Britain and France bleed deeper, their societies strained to the breaking point. Germany holds out further. The war possibly ends through negotiation rather than surrender, producing a Europe where authoritarianism grows even more rapidly. And without the U.S. as a rising economic giant, the post-war global economy is weaker, less innovative, and more dependent on Britain's aging imperial structure. World War II becomes even more uncertain. Would Britain and its North American dominion have the strength to resist Nazi Germany without American industry? Would the Pacific War unfold the same way without an American fleet in the Pacific? The balance of global power shifts in unpredictable directions. Perhaps the British Empire fragments earlier. Perhaps Germany holds more territory. Perhaps Japan expands deeper into Asia. The absence of the United States, the economic and military colossus that defined the 20th century, creates a world without a clear stabilizing force. In the long arc of this alternate history, the most profound consequence is this: the modern era of nation-states, democracy, and global institutions looks nothing like ours. Without the American example, the idea that regular citizens can build a republic from scratch spreads more slowly. Democratic revolutions across Europe and Latin America unfold differently. The Cold War never forms in the same shape because there is no U.S.-Soviet rivalry. The space race might never occur. The digital revolution might arrive decades later. Everything slowing down. Everything developing under the heavy, conservative weight of an aging empire. And what about identity? What does it mean to be American in a world where the United States never existed? It means something much closer to being British. Cities like New York and Boston still grow into cultural centers, but their art, politics, and literature reflect imperial values, not frontier independence. The cowboy mythos never forms. The Hollywood dream never takes shape. Jazz, blues, and the explosion of popular culture still emerge from the diverse peoples of North America, but they spread through the channels of empire, not as symbols of a new nation. The world becomes more uniform, more British, more structured, less revolutionary. In this alternate timeline, the dream of independence doesn't disappear, it just sleeps. The idea that the colonies could govern themselves resurfaces again and again, whispered in taverns, argued in assemblies, remembered as a legend of what almost happened. The spirit of 1776 lingers as a myth, a story of what could have been. But without a successful revolution to prove it possible, the myth never becomes reality. And the world we know today, the world shaped by American innovation, American culture, American military power, and American ideology, never arrives. A British-led global order lasts longer, influences deeper, and fades more slowly. So in the end, the question isn't just, what if the United States lost the Revolutionary War? It asks, what kind of world do we live in without a nation built on the promise that people can rule themselves? A world without the bold experiment of American democracy. A world where the 20th century never finds its superpower. A world shaped not by revolution, but by empire.